go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. I'm Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel, and this is going to be a quick intro to part two of my conversation with our Chief Security Officer, Eric McCombs, because on last week's episode, we went a little bit deeper on DeepSeek AI, if you will, and now this week, we're going to be talking about AI in general and the security focuses that organizations should have. So stay tuned for that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of my conversation with Eric McCombs.
Yeah, we felt last week that all-in-one might be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. So that we take a slight break, harness our energies, and dive back in this week fresh.
Yeah. So without further ado, here's Eric McCombs. What type of measures can companies take to mitigate those risks associated with using AI?
The first is to make sure that you have good policies and institutional control so that when you're handling it, you're not running in blindly, that there is some thought to it. From a security standpoint, you would want to do risk analysis to understand what are you looking to do, what are you looking to collect, and there's different types of risks. There's risks in the data, there's risks in, again, the goal is what you're trying to do. From a security standpoint, we're not as involved in the business. What's the business risk if you're building it and it doesn't react as you would like, or it doesn't provide the level of depth, or if it costs more? That's in that kind of risk. There is risk there, but from a security standpoint, the risk comes, are you connecting to a public source? If there's risk there, what are the risks of connecting there? Again, you get into the data handling, the data transmission. What are you sending? Do you have rights to use? Are you going to be gathering back proprietary information from other individuals? How are you protecting, making sure that you're not sending proprietary information? If you're doing healthcare, that you're not sending PHI, personal health or protected health information. You're not sending personally identifiable information on individuals that can be used against them. So basically, analyzing what's your data, how are you going to protect your corporate information, what you're learning, what you're using to teach the learning model. If you're building your own private, internal AI application, again, similar things. How are you protecting the data so it doesn't go out? Because people may want to see what is your learning set that you use. How did you train the learning machine? So making sure that encryption is in place, that access is authorized, that you're following the ethical handling of the data so that you're not showing biases. Again, it depends on the application. If it's health-based, if it's HR-based, you want to make sure that if you're using AI to go through applications, that you're not filtering out applications based on protected classes. That if you're filtering out and you're excluding people intentionally or otherwise, that's still an issue. Even if there's no intent, you really have to make sure the risk and you understand, so that you're training the models, you're verifying, testing, doing all of the steps so that your output addresses any potential risk out there that's identified. You're doing your due diligence and due care to make sure that your product and what you're releasing is accurate, fair, and can be trusted.
Yeah, so basically just to put guardrails around the usage of AI. Yeah. And we've talked about that here in the past. And basically, if you're an organization, make sure that you have a policy around that, how it's going to be used, especially.
And actually, there should be two policies. One for the technical side, if you're developing, or if you have developers and you're making something that's reaching out and using it, if you're planning to integrate it into an application. The other side is for the employees. One, the employees that are using it in the development of this, but also employees elsewhere, because you may have an employee over looking at a problem that they have developing code. Unrelated, you're not developing an AI product, but they put in their code to try to troubleshoot, and all of a sudden it's out there for the world. So, policies on best use practices for employee, separate policy for what you would do if you're building it and doing that, making sure that you have both so that you're covering all the bases.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
And so, what are some of the ethical considerations of using AI models that can potentially access sensitive information? Because I know that you mentioned it just now. There are organizations that are building their own internal AI, or that are acquiring software that they can then start to build off of, their own data, and making sure that it's closed off to the public. But there's ethical considerations in that, even when you're trying to access something that's supposed to be internal.
Again, in those situations, access controls to definitely make sure that you do have, least privilege, so that the rights are going only to the people that need it. The access is only provided to people to need it. So you have role-based access controls in place. So, and they're very well defined. So you may have somebody who sees the full data set. That should be an extremely limited group, especially if it's, personally identifiable information that can be correlated to a health outcome for somebody in that case. You would want to make sure that that's very limited. On the data set that's used to train, you would probably want to make sure that that data has been anonymized, or that the personally identifiable side of things is masked. Because from an AI standpoint, if you're teaching it to help with a diagnosis, you don't need to know who the former diagnosis, who that individual was. You just need to know, symptom, patient A, great, that can't be tied back to an individual, but symptom A, these were the things that were exhibited. This was, the treatment, this was the health outcome. And you can have it go through and help you with your treatment plan, seeing on what's worked, what hasn't worked, if that's what you're training it to do. And somebody somewhere may know who patient A, B, C, and D, but that shouldn't be fed into the model ultimately, because it's not needed unless your risk analysis says it's needed. And then you really didn't make sure your guardrails are up and limiting who can access that, because you have to consider, what happens if that data set does get released. Someone comes in and exfiltrates it through a different matter. So in that regard, that's where you have encryption controls for the data at rest, so that there's other protections that you handle that aren't specific to AI that you implement to make sure that controls are in place. But ethically, again, you really want to make sure that you're limiting who can see that information. What's the goal of what you're trying to do? Is it right? I think a big thing also in the ethics of using AI is, are you using it to enhance employee interaction with the information? Are you looking to replace people? And that's a wider AI concern, where you see more in the news lately about, the concerns on AI actually replacing people. Ethically making sure how you're designing it is to enhance and improve service working with people, because people, on the end of the day, I think are still when trained properly, are the final guardrail that you need to have in place to make sure things are working. Release it on its own and intend to take the human factor out, that can quickly become an issue.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. All right, so let's discuss any real world examples where AI has compromised confidential information. You kind of alluded to one earlier with Samsung, but do you have any others?
Actually, the biggest one where AI was used to compromise people's data was the Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica conflict. That actually was back in 2016. If y'all remember it, where Facebook was using AI to go through and kind of learn a lot about everything. They passed the data on to this organization. That was probably the big one, where everybody's information was compromised, that used Facebook to the degree, and it was used to analyze behaviors and used for marketing. So that was probably the biggest one that everyone, again, ChatGPT was used. It's there haven't been as many major things. AI has been used. Actually, there was an interesting thing I was reading, that AI was used to help analyze and to figure out what to extract from a company. It wasn't as much that AI was using, a flaw in AI, but it was they had an opening and they analyzed what was there and used that to pull information out. A lot of public details on things aren't out there, apart from, random stories of somebody's information showed up. A lot of the people, once things are released, it kind of disappears from sight because people don't want to release too much. So you get the headline and a very high level blurb, but not into the depths of how the exploits happen, I think, for fear of copycats, if nothing else.
Right.
Um,
Right. And I hope that continues because we don't need any more. We
yeah,
don't need copycats out there trying to mimic what
yeah.
people are trying to find out with AI. All right. So before we go, let's talk about how should companies balance the benefits and risks of integrating advanced AI technologies into their operations.
I think to understand the benefits versus risks, I think first, again, the risk analysis to look at what problem are you trying to solve? How will the tool fit in? What, and again, understanding what you're gathering, tying that into policies and procedures on, once you have that understanding of the data that you have, the problem you're trying to solve, what's the benefit? How are you improving your workers' efficiency in some cases? Thinking of like you're working on a help desk application where you're allowing your help desk users to go in, query previous case information, provide an update that they can give, or even a chatbot, a help desk chatbot where people can come in and solve problems, tier one or tier two, even problems before they have to elevate. Understanding what problem you're trying to solve, and then what do you need? What's the minimum you need to provide to the tool to make sure that you're reaching that end goal? Are you looking through and analyzing to make sure that you're not oversharing any information? We're doing this. We don't need to show, the location of the person. We don't need to show the name of the individual, any other identifying information for whatever reason to solve the problem. Or, like the example I gave earlier on the medical client, or, helping with a medical application if you're doing diagnoses. Again, what's the minimum that you need? Making sure you're really processing it and thinking it, that you have policies in place ahead of time so that the people that are building the product can look through and go, oh, we were looking to gather that, but now I see why we shouldn't. Or if we need that, what do we need to do to make sure that that information is protected or limited to the scope of those people that need that? What guardrails are in place, and helping you build the guardrails and identify where guardrails are needed ultimately is the plan or the goal. If that makes sense, or if there's more, if that answered your question, I guess, in that regard. Or
Yeah, no, I think we often talk about here and ask anything about the benefits and the risk of AI in general,
yeah,
and especially in the workplace. I think last episode or a couple episodes ago, we talked about that and how I'm a firm believer that I think it does good to an organization, but of course, if it has the right guardrails around the usage and how employees use it and how what information goes in, we got to remember the adage about garbage in, garbage out. So if you're putting garbage information
yeah,
in it, garbage information is gonna come out of it. So I think there's a lot of benefits. I don't think those
yeah,
benefits fully outweigh those risks, as we've outlined here, some of those risks in this episode. But I think there's good. I think there's good in it. I think it's just a matter of making sure, like as you mentioned, we're putting guardrails and security measures around the usage of the technology and how the
yeah,
organization is using that. And if you're building something internally, like we mentioned, then just make sure you're putting all the safety features around it so that your information
yeah,
doesn't get blasted out into the internet.
yeah, yep, absolutely. And I think, from my standpoint, this is outside of the security realm, and making sure, again, it should be an employee enhancement, not necessarily looking at employee replacement, because I think
Sure.
you still need the human element. I think there was a story that came out that I read just yesterday, actually, for system for all of the drive-throughs to
Oh
replace
wow.
the workers doing the ordering, where it would do that and it would speak and handle that. I can see to a point where the claim is that it will improve efficiency and clarity of ordering. It will be interesting to see if it truly meets the
Yeah.
results, because I think human interaction, there's still a benefit to that. And I think it was interesting. It was a couple of weeks ago. I went into a restaurant where they just had the screens on display to order. It was really odd going into a place where there was nobody in the front. It almost felt like a
Yeah.
sci-fi movie. It was a little uncomfortable. It's surprising how much is having people that you see working behind the counter that can help inspire confidence. So again, there's a balance there. I don't know, and probably going through and thinking of things that hadn't been a consideration. So it will be interesting to see even in that regard how AI is used to make sure
I think,
that you don't lose that.
yeah, I think you bring up the example of McDonald's and maybe taking that away from the drive-through. I think that's going to be really hard because and I'm strictly talking about here in the US and English speaking people, we have a lot of different accents and way we say things around the country. So I can only imagine how hard it would be to train that AI to take somebody from the South ordering a Big Mac and McNuggets versus somebody from the North, New York with that thick accent, or Boston.
Yeah.
And then,
oh my gosh.
you add to that the complexity of, hey, in my case, I speak three languages. So my accent sometimes doesn't necessarily sound the same way. So maybe a little bit of my Spanish accent comes through, or my French accent comes through. And so I can only think about if I'm talking to this thing on the screen in my car with the engine of my car going out, sounding and and the AI trying to understand
the kid
me
in the background talking.
exactly. How fun is that going to be for me to have to repeat myself to the AI in the screen of the
Oh my gosh,
drive-through?
I wouldn't want to have to train it. And it will be interesting. I think the risk there comes with people leaving. It's not a security; it becomes a financial. But there is a risk. Like again, analyzing risk, you need to think wide scale when you're doing that risk analysis, not just the minute thing, but look at the consequences beyond that initial problem. Are there subsequent issues that you're gonna trigger, and make sure you're considering that. And that's where the discussion helps.
And
really being thoughtful in that.
I'd be all up for it if they basically kept that person as an employee and just put them, I don't know if they like to work the kitchen, but put them in the kitchen so that you can get items out the door quicker, right? But if you're going to replace somebody just to replace them, just because you're going to have this AI model now listen to somebody with all the variables that are going to be involved in that listening exercise, I don't know. I have a hard time. I mean, because sometimes think about it. When you're going through a drive-through, there's so many things. You said kids, but what about the music that you have on your radio? What if you just drive up to it and you're like, I forgot to turn it down. So now you're competing against that. So can you imagine that thing trying to discern, is he ordering a Big Mac or is he telling me to go listen to Fleetwood Mac? I don't get it. I don't.
Well, there'll be some really entertaining YouTube video channels, I'm sure, focused on the drive-thrus and people yelling at the machines when it first comes out. Could be fun. Could be a good side business.
Idea, Brian. We should start a YouTube channel for that in the near future.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to feature heavily.
Yeah, it could be fun.
All right. And with that, we'd like to thank Eric McCombs for joining us today to talk about DeepSeek AI and AI in general. Eric, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Eric McCombs talk to us about DeepSeek AI and cybersecurity trends. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and explore what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your ideas or topics with us through social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.